Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. My name's Caitlin and I make videos about reading and writing. In today's video, I am going to be talking about how to choose the best genre for your story. Now this might seem like a basic or even very obvious video. I mean, after all, we are writers, we have a great command of language, character, plot, and if you've made it to the point where you have a completed manuscript, you've definitely thought about your book enough and know in which direction your book goes and what it kind of speaks to. But sometimes we can become so caught up in the thick of things, we're so close to our work that it's hard to step back and really be objective about it. I know for me, a year ago, I was really positioning my work in the wrong genre, and when it comes time to query to agents or even self-publish on Amazon, you are going to have to choose the best genre for your book so that you can attract the most readers as possible. So about a year ago, I was positioning my work more as literary fiction rather than science fiction because of a few different things. One, I had a lot of literary devices in my story and I thought my book really fit the category of literary fiction better. And I also was kind of uncertain about how receptive my book would be if it was positioned as sci-fi. But when it came time to query to agents, I would kind of wonder, do I submit to this agent because they're asking for literary fiction but they don't want sci-fi? And so I was in kind of a predicament. I also think it can be hard to distinguish some of the differences between like chick lit and general fiction or YAF and new adult. So what I'm doing today is just really breaking down all of the categories, breaking down the nuances of each, saying the pros and cons of each market, and kind of giving you guys some questions that you can ask yourself about your book to see if you think your book might fit in that specific genre. Of course, I think there's nothing wrong with having like a subgenre or trying to market to two different genres, but mainly whenever agents pick up your query letter, they are going to want to see one specific market that you are trying to position for. So if you're kind of at the end of your story and you're looking to position your work, go ahead, press that subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up, and keep on watching. So let's talk about science fiction, one of my favorite genres. It's obviously had really great and memorable books that have been turned into movies. Virgin series, The Uglies, The Hunger Games, there's been a lot of blockbusters in sci-fi. However, there are actually a lower correlation of #1 New York Times bestsellers or even #1 Amazon sellers of science fiction books. There's been a lower number of Pulitzer Prizes for those in sci-fi. And so it's a very competitive market in that regard. Also in the regard that not everyone gets science fiction. It's not everyone's cup of tea. And the category is really split up amongst different things. There's no clear-cut path to define what is science fiction. We have those that are writing hard science fiction, which really may be difficult for mainstream people to understand what it means and kind of get into that. You really are competing in a niche market if you're marketing hard science fiction. You know, if you're talking about the aliens and the UFOs and the robots and all of these crazy things that are set far out into the future, and they're very technically written, very scientific written, that can be a very difficult category to market. On the other hand, soft science fiction, which deals more with a political or social structure, also sometimes has those robotic elements and, you know, far into the future that can also be kind of hard to understand. On the other hand, though, that is a little bit more concerned with the development of character in society, which a lot of people may find boring and also not really understand because it's such a complicated category. Also, we have speculative fiction, which kind of falls in the midst of things. It's kind of just speculating about different things in the future. And that can even fall into general fiction. General fiction can have elements of speculative fiction, so that makes this category very complicated and kind of hard to position to one specific consumer. So the questions I would ask if I was trying to position my work into science fiction, which I am, so #1, I would say, is your book set in the future? This is probably the #1 sign that you are writing science fiction if you are writing about society far out into the future. Does your book make a heavy political, scientific, or technological statement? If so, your book may be soft science fiction. Does it ask a lot of what-if questions? Does it deal with fantasy or supernatural elements in an intellectual way? The other end of the spectrum is fantasy, which oftentimes gets confused with science fiction. And so fantasy is all of the Harry Potter, the Disney books, Twilight. And I think that fantasy is even harder to position in than science fiction. Just take Harry Potter, for example, and the struggle J.K. Rowling had with getting an agent. Now, we all know and love Harry Potter. It may as well be the greatest modern literary work because of its popularity, because of its relatableness, the great characters, the intense plot. However, it was such a struggle for her to get an agent, and she talks about that time and time again in interviews. And if it wasn't for the agent's son or daughter, I think it was the daughter, saying that, hey dad, like this is really great, I love it. If it didn't come from a kid, we would not really know Harry Potter in the way we do now. And so that's really powerful and also really makes the category daunting. And I think that this category is so hard to position because once again, like sci-fi, it's not very tangible, it's not very easily explained, but it also markets a little bit more to children or younger people, even though the blockbusters have reach of really every category of people. So to distinguish yourself to fantasy from science fiction, I would say, does your book deal primarily with magic, witchcraft, or supernatural elements? Are the main characters talking animals with human quality? Is your story not set in a specific time period? Is it not really the past, nor the future, nor the present? Next up, we have chick lit, another one of my favorite categories. This is a really great category. It has a wide reach of people, young women from their teens all the way, up to 60 years old. Chick lit is easily understood, it's humorous, it's light, it's funny. We all like it, we all get it. We've all been a woman in these situations of betrayal and scandal, and it's all very interesting to us because it's kind of like our own lives more glamorized. So ask yourself, are your main characters female? Is the story sassy, witty, or sarcastic? Are the characters outrageous or glamorous? Think Gossip Girl. Would it be considered a beach read or a guilty pleasure? Is there a significant scandal that's the main event? A big divorce, betrayal, hooking up behind best friend's back? Young adult fiction, or YAF. This is a great market because it reaches people from middle school all the way through their 60s. Again, it's a wide-reaching market that a lot of people like. Coming of age stories that people can relate to. Everyone's been in high school, everyone's had their first love, so we can all understand that. And there's really a great potential for diverse readers from different backgrounds. So this market seems really great, but unfortunately it's pretty competitive right now, it's pretty saturated, and agents aren't accepting it the way they used to like 5 or 10 years ago, so there's been a lot of competition and saturation in the market. If you can break through, you can get some really great and loyal followers. Are the main characters high schoolers? Is the conflict and theme a bit mature for the high schoolers? Is the voice and characterization more important than the plot? Is the story coming of age? Is it less than 60,000 words? Those are the questions I would be asking myself if I thought I was going to position into the YF market. New adult. New adult is very similar to YF, however, it's not as competitive because people aren't writing new adult in the way that they're writing YF. So in my opinion, new adult right now is a little bit more advantageous. I would say Divergent would be first classified as science fiction and then second classified as new adult fiction. So sometimes this may be like a subcategory to your book. The number one question I would ask, are your characters newly graduated college or young adults? Is the story coming of age, but a little bit older coming of age than YAF? Is the conflict and theme mature but more realistic for your characters? Is there an equal importance between plot and voice? Romance. In my opinion, this is the number one best market to be in. This generally sells the most amount of books, has the most amount of bestsellers. People read romance very rapidly. Just look at successful authors like Nicholas Sparks, Danielle Steele. They have been able to write so much and people still keep reading the books even though they are very similar in nature. And that's because love is a great thing to understand. It's an interesting topic. It can always be a little bit different, and we all have been in love, and we all have this yearning for love. So romance highlights that, and that's why we are so drawn to it as a whole. Is the main conflict about a romantic relationship? Is the dialogue somewhat cheesy but ultimately feels right? Is there more emphasis on steamy heavy plot than voice? Is it lacking the witty element of chick lit, but is more replaced by a soft, sultry, and sexy element? Southern fiction, a kind of obscure newer category. It's a combination between chick lit and romance, but it's set in the South, and that's really the hallmark of it, the fact that it's set in the South. I think this is a fairly good market, but it would be a little bit more advantageous, I think, to market your work as either romance or chick lit. Next, we have mystery, which in my opinion is the #2 market. Tons of bestsellers in mystery, especially on Amazon with indie authors. Mysteries are always interesting to people because it's kind of an escape from the ordinary, although it doesn't necessarily seem like it could imminently happen to you. So it's kind of interesting because there's a lot of foreshadowing, heavy plots, and we're generally interested in stories that kind of keep us up at night and really make us think. But mystery doesn't always have that heaviness or difference that sci-fi typically has. So in that way, it's a little bit more of a relatable category that reaches more people. #1, does your story rely on a heavy use of foreshadowing to keep the plot going? The story may contain some supernatural elements. Is suspense the main factor driving the plot? Has elements of a thriller, but with a little bit more emphasis on the character. Next, we have historical fiction, another really great market. People love history, and historical fiction is a great way for us fiction writers to tap into that love of history that so many people have. #1 is this story will be set in the past and it will closely mirror real events that happened. The plot is really driven by the characters' reactions to the events. Literary fiction. This possibly, maybe, it's hard to say if it would be the most difficult category. It's really right up there with sci-fi and fantasy. Even when the classics were written, War and Peace, A Tale of Two Cities, A Farewell to Arms, these books weren't always immediately received by people, and they weren't necessarily beloved at the time of publication. So this genre is really difficult to tap in today's society because our markets are so saturated. There's so many distractions. The internet is around, we have Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, and we just always want to be on the go. So literary fiction doesn't necessarily captivate people. It's not quick enough for people in the ways that mystery and romance really are. Also, it's about abstract concepts. It's not like historical fiction where we can just easily pinpoint and understand this. #1, literary fiction is marked by a very thin plot. There is artful and succinct description of characters and places. Heavy use of literary devices. The theme is timeless. A big attraction is the writing style and the artful style in which the author presents the information. Technique is very important. Considered boring by non-readers. Finally, we have general fiction, which is kind of like an category because it could really work for you, or it could be really hard to get your book to stand out. Your book can very easily get lost in the shuffle in general fiction, and sometimes agents don't want to position you as general fiction because there's really no niche market. It's so difficult for us because we have to determine if we want to be a niche market and risk limiting our audience, or want to be one of these broader markets and risk not having enough of a loyal fan base. In general fiction, the protagonist is usually 30+. It's marked by a cataclysmic, inciting event in which the rest of the story, the characters spend scrambling around and trying to figure out how their life can be made sense of and how their life is affected by whatever happened. For example, a divorce, a death, a car accident. Elements of nostalgia of before, realistic and close to life. So that's a breakdown of all of the mainstream genres that we're seeing in today's reading climate. I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. I hope that you found it helpful. Let me know your thoughts. What kind of book are you writing? Are you writing sci-fi, historical fiction, romance? Let me know. Do you disagree? Do you think sci-fi is a great and easily marketed category? Do you think chick lit is too saturated and not a great category right now? Let me know your thoughts below. Connect with me on my socials, and I'll see you guys in my next one. Thank you so much for watching. Bye!